Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Crimson Crossover podcast presented by the Field of 68. I'm your host, Christian Sykes, joined as always by Charles Branch and Joey Blackwell. How you guys doing today?
Uh, sun's been shining in the past couple of days, so got some beautiful weather, both literally and figuratively. Looking forward to talking about it with you guys today.
I've been looking forward to recapping last Saturday, but within that, have still really struggled to figure out how to describe this team. Obviously, all of us are, living off a high right now of the huge win at Auburn and what we saw from this Alabama basketball team, which is what we expected a lot during this year, and they have done that at times. But yeah, just we wanted this team to start playing well when you got to March, and we're in March. And even though we're sitting here 1-2 in March, I think for two and a half of those games, you can be really encouraged with the performances that were put together against really, really top teams, not only in our league, but across the country. But as we saw for that 10-minute stretch against Florida, you got to bring it for 40 minutes. And that's what we did on Saturday. And I know we'll get into it more, but I'm really happy for these guys. It kind of seemed like they let some things out that may have been building from the season two with some of their emotions. And it's never a bad thing to win in the jungle because as people say, it's tough place to play, hardest ticket to get in the SEC. All the things that they want to hang banners about, but they still couldn't take care of the Tide on the last regular season game of the SEC this year.
And I know we talked about it on the space, but I would just like to say congratulations, Charles, for perfectly picking the home and home series that the visitors would win both games. I think it's not that I thought it was impossible, but I did not think that was probable when you predicted it back in the day. So good pick there.
But look, I don't want to beat my chest about it because I did waver a lot after once we got close to our game at home that I thought it would flip after Auburn had lost to Florida and we were playing so much better. But it did it we know what it felt like as far as us going to playing at home in Tuscaloosa, the atmosphere, and maybe that intensity had dropped a little bit at Auburn since they'd already secured the regular season championship. But nobody can tell me that they were not invested in trying to win that game on Saturday. It meant something to them. You can tell it meant something to them the way that Janai Broome acted after the game. You could see it in some of the clips that their team walking off the floor. You can see it that they canceled the championship ceremonies and cutting down the nets. I mean, can you imagine? Like you're playing your arch rival at home and you have a chance to, celebrate the SEC championship and cut down the nets and you don't do it because, we've taken care of that business since Nate Oates has gotten there in 2021 and 2023. Like that's what elite programs do. And obviously we're an elite program and Auburn still got a ways to go. So, you know, I tip their hat to them on a great season. I know they're excited to hang the banner next to highest price tickets in the SEC and smallest gym in the state of Alabama. But they had an opportunity to basically have a coordination and couldn't pull it off.
No holds barred. To say. Charles, the game already happened. We're not smack talking going into a game. It already
Yeah,
happened.
and Charles, we do have the SEC tournament, coming up this week. That it
And,
is
and the national
and the
championship.
national championship. And I'll tell you the same thing that I told Hunter Johnson when he's posting about the double and all of that. I was like, you should be posting that kind of stuff before the SEC tournament. Like, they still could go win the double, right? Like they could go win the SEC tournament championship. They could go like there's no reason for an Alabama fan to be floating like toting their, whatever about the double quite yet. Now, if it gets to Sunday and Auburn's not in the championship or Auburn loses the championship, then yeah, that's so fun. Um,
And I mean this seriously, because this has been a heated rivalry for the past couple of years with how both programs have gotten really good in basketball. Sometimes, ping ponging off of each other, and this year it came together where both teams are really, really good. Look, I'm gonna step aside from the Baker Mazara incident with Youngblood. But there's enough videotape. There's more videotape on both those guys from that game than certain couples probably have from their wedding days, how many times the officials had to go review the monitor for altercations between them. Um, but there has been, and I'll even say like, the Auburn student fans, throwing their towels and stuff like that. I still feel like it's been intense, but there's been a lot of respect that goes into this game. I think Pearl and Oates respect each other. Um, there hasn't really been this just nasty, nasty altercation between both teams. You've had some things here and there, and it's only going to ratchet up from here as far as the intensity, especially if there's going to be more games this year. There will be a changing of the guard after this season. We've obviously got a lot of fifth-year guys that are done with eligibility. Auburn's got a lot of fifth-year guys that are done with eligibility. My hope is that this rivalry will continue to build on the basketball floor, but it can still remain respectful on the court. And one additional thing, people have been talking about Iron Bowl basketball. Does it need to be changed? Do we need to refer to something different than being the IBOB? I'm ready to call it the Crane game after what happened Saturday. Whoever wins, they can claim the Crane for
for the
that
year. Yeah.
game, at midcourt or something like that. But no, I do mean that seriously. Both programs have taken this state to the next level it relates to basketball. The fans may get after each other, but both coaches, I think, do a pretty good job of being respectful to each other and trying to have their teams play the game the right way and not have it become a literal fist fight on the floor.
So, couple things or a couple questions, right? Um, One, what are your thoughts on the Baker Mazzara Youngblood incident?
Which one?
All of it, all encompassing. Just because, like, I've seen some Auburn fans getting mad about the Baker Mazzara where going into the paint, falls down, and Chris Youngblood. And I promise you, like Baker Mazzara did not feel Chris Youngblood like it would like grazed his elbow, and all of a sudden now we're seeing that all this talk about how Chris Youngblood's like this dirty player, all of this. I think he's a physical player. I don't necessarily think he's a dirty player, but it just and then the retaliation, or not necessarily retaliation, but like what then Chad Baker Mazara did, where he didn't hit him once in the back of the head, he hit him twice in the back of the head with his elbow. After he'd already cut his eye open. If you saw the photo post game where Chris Youngblood's got blood coming down his face, like, what are your thoughts on that situation?
Joey, you want to go first?
Yeah, I think it was a situation where it's just another game that we've seen a good bit of this year where the refs where the officials let the game get away from them. We saw a lot of uncalled fouls on both sides in that first half. I mean, Alabama did not play an innocent game. Neither did Auburn. It was a very gritty physical game, which it always is between Alabama and Auburn. But I think it was just another example of the officials letting the game get away from them. When the flagrant two was called, I think that was a way of officials kind of combining makeup calls to try to reset the tone of the game as far as letting people get away with a lot of stuff. I think a flagrant two, and this is probably going to make some people mad. I think a flagrant two in that situation was probably a little bit much just by watching it, but I know probably y'all are both going to disagree with me on that. But I think it's fine if you consider all the stuff that was leading up to that being rolled into a one singular foul call. But in an isolated incident, I think that might have been a little bit much at the time. At the end of the day, though, I think there is a lot of respect between these two programs. Like you were saying, Charles, particularly between Nate Oates and Bruce Pearl. They both want to win the game really badly. And so do these players. That's why the players care so much about it. But there is that level of respect between those two guys. I'd like to see that more on the court and not just in the pre-game and post-game handshake. But that being said, there's a reason why we all put a lot of stock in this game. It's not just because it's Alabama and Auburn. It's because it's typically a pretty darn good basketball game, regardless of the skill level, regardless of where the game is played. So ultimately, not too many thoughts about it. What happened. I don't think that was what won the game for Alabama. I know I saw a lot of Auburn fans that thought that was a difference maker, but it's the problem is how many times are we going to keep going back to Chad Baker Mazzara and him always being the issue? Um, Everybody likes to sit there and defend him, and it's like why are y'all having to backtrack so much for the same guy? If like is I get it if you're having to like defend multiple guys and like this guy had an incident and then 6 games later this guy had an incident, but it seems like CBM is always the common denominator. So let's just call a spade, and that's where I'll leave it then.
Um, the play where Baker Mazzara got Youngblood in the eye, 100%, in my opinion, incidental contact. Was trying to make a play on the basketball, was trying to tip up and get it out to somebody, and obviously he catches Chris in the face. I thought there was a chance that they would call that an F1 just because of the contact to the face, but I also thought there was plenty there to see that it was incidental contact because of the ball being there and just trying to make a play on it. Chris running down the floor and catching Baker Mazzara with his foot, like that's him trying to get wide and run the floor. This is going to sound weird, but that's him trying to make a basketball play within the set. Um, it was, I don't, we've seen a lot more intentionality when somebody's trying to step on somebody. That's not what he was trying to do. If I remember the video correctly, like his foot's coming up in the air, not gliding down on the floor trying to catch Baker Mazzara in the back of the head there. And he's trying to get down the floor, run the floor, get, behind the 3-point line as we have our break. Because interestingly enough, we did run a fast break and Holloway knocked down a quick three on that play. And then the play that he got in F2, obviously it was very clear that it was an elbow to the back of Youngblood's head. If he doesn't elbow him in the head and puts the elbow more in the back, it's a common foul. It's probably something that doesn't even get called because of just where it was positioned on the floor and sight lines and things like that. It's kind of like holding in football at times where you can't always see it, but it's going on. How physical rebounding can be just in the SEC. But the fact that it was to the back of the head, and I think it was, like you said, it was twice, is definitely what led to the F2. Interestingly enough, that happened with 10 minutes left to go in the second half, and Auburn doesn't get called for another foul until like 2 minutes left in overtime. So if the officials didn't feel comfortable with that call, they made up for it for the next 10 minutes in the second half, in my opinion. But obviously Baker Mazzara has gotten that reputation, and it's not just from the Yale game. It was popping Youngblood in the face as he fouled out, in Tuscaloosa. It's been other incidents throughout the year. And as much as Joe Goodman can want to plead that referees need to be, more lenient with Baker Mazzara, there's just no track record to show that. And if Alabama had a guy like that, which I think we've talked about internally at times about which certain guys hadn't done this or certain guys hadn't done that. We'll use Muhammad Wagi last year against Florida as an example, where he basically dropped a wrestling power elbow on the Florida guy. That was a play that we all agreed he needed to be taken out of the game. I think he got an F1. I think we all would agree he probably should have been an F2. Nate Oates didn't play him the rest of the game. I don't think he didn't play him because he thought it should have been an F2 or tried to prevent him from being suspended. I think he actually was suspended the next game against Kentucky. But that unfortunately happens. That is going to happen at times. It just seems to happen a lot with Baker Mazzara for Auburn. And, him being a super senior, even with an extra year potentially to come back, he's a guy that I would expect a lot of their fans. I think I even heard from a couple Auburn fans that he's, you either love him or hate him. And maybe hate's a strong word, but you're putting your team in a difficult situation like you did last year. And if Auburn's trying to win a national championship, he doesn't need to put his teams in difficult situations because that microscope's going to get tighter and tighter and tighter as they go farther and farther in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, the reason why I ask is like I agree with you, Joey. I don't think that the F2 call warranted an F2. I really don't. Like I've seen F1 call, like the Wagi call. Like that's a perfect example. Like that's an F2 play. And that was called an F1. I do think that Baker Mazzara should have had probably one, maybe two more F1 calls or flagrant calls in that game. Specifically the Chris Youngblood smacking him in the face, which again caused blood to come out of him. That was an unwarranted play where you could, if you're a player, you can stop your hand from hitting that guy in the face, and he didn't, and he drew blood. Another one was, I'm pretty sure, like he put an elbow in Chris Youngblood's back on like a rebound or something, like Chris fell down. Like those are things that at least another foul call should have been called, right? Like I think the one in the face got called a common foul. The other one didn't get called, but regardless, he picked up his fourth foul, so he would have been out of the game if those calls had been called properly. Regardless if it was an F1 or an F2, because he would have either picked up his fifth foul or it would have been his second flagrant foul, which he would have been kicked out of the game. Um, for Auburn, I kind of said that I've been saying this for about 2 months now. Chad Baker Mazara is the reason why you're not going to win a national championship this year, unless he changes something, right? He's going to cost you games. And I believe that Auburn probably wins that game if Chad Baker Mazara is on the court the final 10 minutes, 10, 11 minutes. Probably not crazy amount. Maybe it's a score but flipped, right? But when he's your what is he like their second or third leading scorer, and not just that, Auburn's offense runs so much through Janai Broome and what he and like that's how they play their offense. They're playing through Janai Broome for good reason. He's a National Player of the Year candidate, but Alabama did a really good job, despite Broome getting 34 points, of making sure that Broome couldn't get the ball to the other playmakers on the team. And you know what Chad Baker Mazara does so well for this Auburn team is he makes bad shots. He makes bad shots, like shots that are highly contested from the 3-point line. He hits the threes like against Alabama. I think it was either LeBaron or Chris Youngblood was directly in his face on a three after we had like tied the game or something like that, and he just drains a three, like step back drain three. That's just impossible to defend. You're defending it well, and he just makes it. That's what Chad Baker Mazara does, and to not have him on the court, I think it hurt Auburn's offense so much because you're having to rely on Pettiford, you're having to rely on Miles Kelly, and outside of a couple of shots, I think Alabama did a good enough job to make sure that they weren't going to get hot. Um, and so for Auburn, like moving forward, you have to figure out how you get him under control because you lost the Yale game last year because not maybe because of him, but it's a reason, it's a factor. You lose the Alabama game partially due to him. And it seems like based off of like the Instagram posts and everything that have come out, he doesn't really care. He has no remorse. He's a kid that doesn't see fault in anything that he does. And for a 25-year-old man to not take responsibility for that is quite disappointing, especially for such a talented player like Chad Baker Mazara, in my opinion. My second question is thoughts on Nate Oates celebrating with his team after the game.
I mean, I personally didn't have a problem with it. I don't think he did really anything out of line. I mean, I know a lot of people were, pulling up Bruce Pearl doing the crane after the game, and then Auburn fans were butted with, well, that was in Neville, that was in front of our own students, yada yada. I mean, I don't know. It's it's tough to really for anyone, regardless of who you root for. It's tough for anyone to say what they would do in that moment. There's so much emotion, and there was a lot more, I feel like, riding on that game than just SEC tournament seeding. It's and a lot more also than just bragging rights. I think this team needed a win like that in order to, finally probably, I don't want to say crest a summit, but kind of get over the hump. You know what I mean? Heading into the SEC tournament. And I think the manner of that win, and then, with it being a buzzer beater, having just lost a buzzer beater not too long ago, I think that kind of emotion is why Oates was so excited. That being said, taunting fans, which I believe that is what he was doing, in a way, is a little much, but there's a reason why the Iron Bowl of basketball means so much to both fan bases. It's because of moments like that. And if you don't allow moments like that to happen, regardless of if it's Oates, Pearl, Janai Broom, Chad Baker Mazzara, Mark Sears, Grant Nelson, it doesn't matter. If you don't allow those type of moments to happen, then what's the point? Like, where's the emotion in the rivalry at all? So I don't know. A coach acted excited because his team got a buzzer beating shot, and also kudos to Bruce Pearl though after that game, walking over and telling the students, it was after they had already moved away, but him going over there trying to calm the students down, like that was really really classy of him. But um, just overall, it's just an overreaction. I think. I mean, we literally have Oates on video after beating LSU in the SC tournament game saying, "Get the so and so out of here," and not very many people really commented on that. Granted, a lot of people didn't really like Will Wade that much, but I don't know. I think it's overreaction.
The win on Saturday felt like this stretch that has been so difficult and has been recognized by national media and ourselves here on this podcast as being so difficult, and all the top 25 teams playing all the top 25 teams. That win on Saturday made it feel like we've gone 7-0 during this stretch, even though we've been 3-4. Like, it kind of released some of the demons I feel like that we saw or that came in Wednesday after the game against Florida and losing at home to Auburn in the first game, and how we came out against Missouri when we were playing there. I would have liked for Oates to celebrate, not run across the court to where the team was, but how he threw his hands up in the air when it went in, celebrate, shake Pearl's hand, shake the assistant, whatever assistant coach came up, shake their hand, and then let him make a beeline over to the team. I think that's just something that happens a lot. But that environment, what we have been through, like, you're not, it's hard to keep in the presence of mind of this is what I need to go do. So yeah, we're probably biased that we're going to excuse that. I mean, y'all heard me on the space after the game. So if I'm going to act like that, then how can I expect Oates to be able to remain calm, go shake a hand, and then go celebrate, even if he is our head coach? So it's something for people to pick on. It's something to talk about, whether he's, that's not classy or anything like that. My moral of the story is Alabama 93, Auburn 91 at Auburn, whatever.
And real quick, also, can we just stop, like, both fan bases stop like they have any sort of moral high ground over the other? And that goes for Alabama fans too. Like, this is like a rivalry. Like, there are going to be awful Alabama fans and awful Auburn fans. There's going to be awful Auburn players, awful Bama players, coaches, whatever. Like, please, everybody get off their moral high horses, because you're never going to win that argument. You're just going to make people laugh at you. So it's such a goofy thing.
Here's my thoughts. One, if you're an Auburn fan, you're pissed off at it, and you're an Auburn player, Auburn coach, don't lose.
Plain and simple.
Don't lose. And it doesn't happen. Like that. I don't know what else to say. Like, just don't lose. If you don't lose the game, Nate Oates doesn't go and do that. They don't ruin your ceremony. You don't all of this. Like, win the game. But on a serious note, here's the thing that I recognize with what Nate did, which is he does the fist bump. He goes runs to his players because they're chirping at the Auburn students. He kind of does like a 1, 2, 3 like pump up with his arms, and people aren't noticing this. He then starts pulling players away from the student section because maybe it's because they're throwing things, maybe it's because the um, players are saying things to Auburn fans that Nate doesn't want them to, like to start like a riot or anything. But like Nate, like after he does like his whole like pumping up the student section or whatever, he's actively pulling players away from the student section. So like in the moment, Nate is a passionate coach. He plays with he has a lot of passion. The LSU game's a great example of just that's how Nate Oates coaches. In the moment, like he's allowed to be happy that his team just went on the road, beat the number one team who also happens to be your biggest rival after you lost the game at home. Like coaches are allowed to show emotion. But then he immediately, once he showed his emotion, went back into coach mode and started pulling players away. And then I believe they went and shook hands afterwards too. Like it's not like they just like left Auburn players high and dry, left the Auburn coaches high and dry. Like it also was a buzzer beater in overtime, right? Like I think fans are kind of just losing the plot of what happened in the game because they want to find some type of justification as to why they lost or place blame somewhere, right? And do I think he probably should have shaken or shook Bruce's hand directly after that? Yes, but like, who cares? I guarantee you, Bruce Pearl would do something similar if roles were reversed. I mean, heck, he slammed a headset down, probably broke it at Alabama because they lost and was yelling. Right? There's no one. Alabama fans didn't find issue with that. They actually thought it was hilarious, and it's a meme. Right? Like if it was Bruce Pearl and Bruce Pearl did that to Alabama, Auburn fans would be applauding it the same way Alabama fans would be, which is what you were saying, Joey. Like there's no winning when it comes to like moral high ground with this because look, every team's got every team's got to be a villain or has a villain. Every player, isn't perfect. They aren't I mean, yeah, these guys are like friends off the court and stuff, but when you get on the court, those guys are ultimate competitors and that's what they're going to show. So, I
Look,
don't know.
7 years ago, Bruce Pearl tried to fight Lou Deneen in the handshake line after we beat him in St. Louis. Like the emotions get to these guys as it should. Like it means something to them on both sides of the court. So, um, yeah, just something for Auburn fans to try to chip away at which was a huge win for Alabama. Just like the win in Tuscaloosa for Auburn was a huge win for them.
Um, do you feel better about this team if roles were reversed, Auburn wins on a buzzer beater? Do you feel the same, better, or worse about this team than you do right now over the fact that they won?
I feel the same. Um, as far as, I mean, be disappointed that they didn't get the win, but the way that they played that game, it was what we had been wanting to see from them. It was what I had wanted to see from them. I think I said that last week. It's like, because I thought we were going to lose the game. I just wanted to see improvement. And that's what we saw. Um, I think this team showed a lot of grit and determination. The effort was there. The shots were falling. Just everything was, was falling into place really. That being said, it wasn't a perfect game, but it was a considerable improvement over the effort we had against Florida. So I think if you kind of just burn the tape for Florida, look at the previous three games before that, and look at the Auburn game, I'm still really, really liking where we are. And the thing is now is that every game for the rest of the season now is single elimination. So I think we've seen with Oates coached teams before, there's a switch that flips in them when that happens. And I really think that, do I think we're going to win the SEC tournament? Not necessarily. We'll talk about that later. But I think that there's just a lot more at stake now. And I think the players aren't going to have an issue getting up for games for the rest of this year. And if they do, well, that's it.
Absolutely.
I do think since the first 5 minutes at home against Kentucky, even in the Florida game, that this team has been playing with a lot of intensity. I think we, for whatever reason, ran out of gas midway through the second half against Florida. Still fought, but obviously had some guys that, whether they were sick or just getting beaten up in the Tennessee game, that we've played with a lot more intensity and focus, in my opinion, since that Kentucky game in Tuscaloosa. What was added to that um, Saturday was either just the toughness and playing to the standard of toughness that Oates challenged the team before the game and coming off of Florida, and maybe even a little bit of a swagger too with this team. And I don't know, this team should have some swagger about them, being a top 10 team, competing for a number one national seed in the NCAA tournament. But coming off the game Wednesday, that's a part that felt like it kind of just came out of nowhere, especially out of Grant Nelson and Cliff, two guys that should have that ability. They've done it on the big stage, but they went after the bigs at Auburn and played like they knew they were the best players on the floor in a sense. Um, I think to your question about how I would feel, I would have been similar to the Tennessee game, really encouraged with how we played, the intensity and all that, but would have had some concern, maybe similar to last year's teams, where you're playing these top teams really well, but you're not able to get over the hump. Now it's a lot better than last year's team, where against Purdue and Creighton in Arizona, you ran out of gas and got beat by Creighton. It was only a possession, but the other two it may have been 10 points or something like that. And these were more buzzer beater type games against Tennessee and Auburn. But now you've got the confidence, or have regained that confidence, going back to November when you beat Houston and some other teams, that it's not that you can just play with the top teams in the country, but you can beat the top teams in the country because you are one of the top teams in the country.
Yeah, and the reason why I ask is because that's kind of my thought process is like Alabama's played well with almost every single opponent that they faced this year. I think Florida is probably the exception. Just because I know that was a 5 point game, but that game really wasn't that close. It truthfully wasn't that close. And Florida's a good team, and Florida's a terrible matchup for Alabama. Unfortunately, Alabama's, if they win on Friday, they're likely going to face Florida on Saturday, right? But like it felt like in SEC play, Alabama couldn't win again. I mean, they didn't. They didn't win against the top three teams in the SEC. Or no, is Missouri the fifth team?
Missouri's the sixth team. So
And
A&M,
yeah. So
you go one, no, two and four, 2-5, whatever the number is, against the top six teams, and you being one of the top six teams in the SEC.
exactly. And like that's the concerning stat. And before the Auburn game, it was one in whatever it was, right? And it was A&M, and I don't believe they had Wade Taylor when
They
we played.
didn't. And I'm wrong. Kentucky is the sixth seed. Missouri's the seventh seed based off of tiebreakers. But the point still stands. You had a losing record against the top seven teams in the SEC, even with your two wins against Kentucky, your win against A&M, and this win against Auburn. I think you were 4-5. Maybe you were 500, but not what you probably wanted to be against those top teams.
And the top teams are the teams that are the one seeds in the NCAA tournament for the most part. I mean, obviously not Kentucky and Missouri and A&M, right? But like Tennessee's fighting for a one seed. Florida is a one seed right now. Auburn is a one seed right now. Like when you are talking about trying to get to a Final Four, those are games you need to win to prove that because most likely you're going to be in the Final Four against those teams. And if you haven't beaten them in the season, who's to say you're going to beat them in the Final Four? So I think for Alabama, the confidence to know that they can do that is huge. It's huge. I'll be interested to see, and I think this is a really good segue into the SEC tournament. If Alabama does go face Florida on Saturday, do we see the same Alabama team that we saw on Wednesday? Right? That's what I'm interested to see. We'll get to that matchup, but Charles, start us off with some NCAA or SEC tournament
Yeah, just
talk.
real quick, I want to put a bow on the Auburn game by mentioning Mark Sears and not necessarily the floater that he hit to win the game, the last 15 seconds, but the first 44 minutes, 45 seconds of the game. Um, Mark finishes the game with 9 points. He's 3 of 9 from the field, but he has 7 assists. And I don't know about y'all, but I thought it was one of Mark's better games of just letting the game come to him. And it just felt like he was keeping the ball moving. He was doing great on defense. There's a play when I went back and watched it. Um, Look, if Tahad Pettiford doesn't have that sequence in the first half and Miles Kelly doesn't start off the second half hot from three, we could be sitting here talking about an Alabama 10-point win. But it was tied 83-83 in overtime. The play that LeBaron steals it from Pettiford, takes it down, gets a layup, and we go 85-83. Cardwell sets an off-ball screen on a curl for Miles Kelly, and that's who Sears is guarding. And Sears is right on him to where Pettiford can't make the pass. And you got Auburn now out of rhythm. So they try to reset. Kelly pushes off. They try to run a flare screen, and as they're running that play is when the LeBaron steals the ball from Pettiford. So credit goes to LeBaron for making the steal, making the play, and then converting it. But so many times I feel like we've seen this Alabama team where we've just let other teams run their offense. We would have let Miles Kelly make that catch and maybe given him the space to shoot the three, or just allowed him to make the catch and let them go to their second, third, or fourth option. We were a lot more locked in off the ball. I mean, yeah, Janai Broome went for 34 points, but nobody else necessarily went off for Auburn like they did in the first game. As an example, when the first game in Tuscaloosa, Janai has 19 points, but Chaney Johnson and Denver Jones go for 14 and 16 respectively. Those guys averaged 10 points a game. You did a better job of letting the number one guy for these teams get what they want and probably got more than what they needed to, but controlled everybody else. And when you look at our losses for this year, the only players that have led their team in points that beat us and led it in points in the game was Janai Broome getting 19 in Tuscaloosa. And I just mentioned he had more guys kind of play above their point total in that game. Purdue's Kaufman Wren went for 26. He leads Purdue with about 20 points a game. And Mark Mitchell for Missouri when he went for 31. But we also know Caleb Grill went for 25 in that game, and he only averages about 14 points a game. Talking about this game against Florida on Wednesday, Walter Clayton's their leading scorer, but the team that led them in points against us was Alex Condon. He goes for 27. He's a guy who averages only 11 and a half points a game. Tennessee, Chaz Lanier averages, I think, 18 points a game for them. He goes for 18, but the guy who really beat us was Jordan Gainey. So being able to play more of that team, that's what I want to see, however many games we have in this SEC tournament, because the teams that we're going to play in potentially Kentucky and Florida, they got a lot of scorers. But can we make them more one-dimensional and not have everybody go off against us, especially those guys that you should be able to control a lot better? I don't know if you guys have any thoughts about that as far as just trying to do a better job of locking in where, in games where like North Dakota, Eagle Staff going for 40 points, Josh Hubbard going for 38 in the game against Starkville. LJ Cryer went for 30 against us in the new era, and Dylan Harper went for 37. but those are all games that we won because we did a good job of shutting down their supporting cast and not necessarily having somebody else come beside them to make it more difficult in those games defensively for us.
Look, Alabama scores enough points. I think they average 90 plus points scored a game, where Broome gets 34 and they need 60 plus points or 60 points or technically 50 something points to come from elsewhere to beat us, right? And a lot of people get upset. Like, I didn't even realize Janai Broome had 34 points in that game. I'm being completely honest. Like, someone was like, oh, Janai went for 34. And I was like, excuse me? Like, it didn't feel like he got 34 points. I mean, he put up what,
20,
26?
28 shots. He was
Yeah.
15 of 28. And he made a lot of really difficult shots.
Yeah.
He definitely got some looks right at the rim, but there was a lot of those fall away, step back shots that we forced him into that, aren't always the best shots. For a guy like him, it probably is a good shot. He probably makes more than 50% of those, but we did a good job forcing them into more difficult shots than just shots at the rim.
I think at times you lose Pettiford. He hits three threes in a row. You lose Kelly. He hits two threes. Like, that's bound to happen at some point. Auburn's a good team. But on a possession by possession basis, Alabama did a really good job of one, making sure that Auburn wasn't going to get out and run and have those highlight plays like they do that gets the crowd in the game. And then two, like you said, making sure that people aren't going off against them. Yeah, Janai Broome got 34. They still lost the game. So, I don't have any problem with the thought process. Um, obviously, I don't really want a team to have or a player to have 34 points, but like if you give them 34 and we win, I don't really care.
Yeah. All right. So now getting to the SEC tournament where our three potential opponents are Oklahoma, Georgia, and Kentucky. I'll focus on Kentucky first because if you do face Kentucky on what, I think it's supposed to be 8:30, but as we know with these basketball games, we probably won't tip off until about 9:15 on Friday night Central Time. Um, I'd like to see Kentucky, not because I feel like, they're a worse team than Georgia or Oklahoma, but in the history of Alabama basketball, Alabama has never had a three-game winning streak against Kentucky, ever. And you have the opportunity to do that. And not only do you have the opportunity to do that, you have the opportunity to do that in one season. So I think that'd be really cool to have that opportunity against Kentucky. Also, we have not beaten Kentucky in the SEC tournament, in an SEC tournament game since 1983. So a lot of things to get some monkeys off our back and make some history potentially on Friday night should we see Kentucky. They're still out with Jackson Robinson's been shut down for the year. It's a game that they still got really good players. How much can you make somebody like Amari Williams beat you, which is what we were able to kind of force halfway through the first half and the second half in Tuscaloosa after we did a better job locking down Andrew Carr and Kobe Bray. They still got a Otega Owe who played with a lot of foul trouble in the game in Tuscaloosa. I think that game really just comes down to mindset and defensive intensity. It's a game that probably both teams could score 90 apiece like they did in Lexington. But it would be great to see us come out with kind of the same defensive intensity that we've played these past couple games, excluding the Florida game, of course, and just lock in, get a win, get to semifinal Saturday where you're playing most likely either Missouri or Florida with an opportunity for some redemption to redeem yourself from some disappointing performances during the regular season against each of those teams. If you play Georgia or Oklahoma, it's obviously their third game in the third day. For Oklahoma, it's the freshman Jeremiah Fears. Again, like I just said, he's a guy that he may go for 25 or 30, making sure guys like Jalen Moore and Duke Miles and Bryson Goodine don't go with him. Think about the same thing with Georgia, Asa Newell, who we're all very familiar with. And he does have a decent counterpart in Silas Demery. that can score with them as well. But making sure guys like a Blue Kane or a Tyron Lawrence or an RJ Godfrey or something like that just doesn't come out of nowhere and puts 20 points against us. But I think with our style of play, getting into third game in a row for those two teams should be able to get into their legs and hopefully get into their legs early and often should we see either Georgia or Oklahoma Friday night.
Oh, I thought you were going to say something, Joe. My fault. Um,
No. I
I'm
was too busy filling
hoping
up my bracket over here.
I'm hoping we get Oklahoma or Georgia. I just think you're going to end up getting ultimately Kentucky. And like you
Mhm.
said, Alabama, I don't think they've never beaten Kentucky 3 times in a row, right?
Never, no, never in a season, never at any point, in whatever words aren't coming to me, but we've never had a 3 game winning streak against Kentucky. It's always topped out at two, and that's happened multiple times. But this would be the first time that Alabama's won 3 straight games against Kentucky at any point during this series.
Yeah, and a bigger thing that I want to kind of point out is no, I don't know the exact stat. Maybe it's all national champions, but it's at least Power Five. Anytime that the team has been a national champion, they have not lost their first game of a conference tournament.
That's correct. Every national champion has won at least 1 game in their conference tournament.
And I think that I know that's just an obscure stat that like it's bound to happen where a team loses, like eventually a team loses and ends up winning. Like that's bound to happen eventually, just like a 16 beating a one is bound to happen. But I think that the reason why that stat's important is because you're not going into the NCAA tournament having not played for sometimes even a week. And you're while you would be fresh, like I just think that it's important to at least kind of continue to build on the confidence that you've had with the Auburn game and not lose the momentum. Like what Alabama did so well last year is built momentum throughout the tournament to where that's how they made their Final Four run. And so if Alabama is able to build that early, then maybe Alabama will have more momentum when it comes to potentially getting into the Final Four, and maybe they get over that hump as well. I'm not predicting that. I'm just saying that like that's just kind of my thought process. That's why I think at least getting one in the SEC tournament's kind of crucial for Alabama.
Well, and
And I think
hopefully, sorry, go ahead, Joey.
I was just gonna say, and I think we'll get one. I'm not, I think Bama backed up really well against Kentucky this year, and there's a reason why they've beaten them twice. Normally, if I was playing an opponent a third time, I'd be pretty worried. I think in this case, I don't know. I think we've kind of caught Kentucky at a right time when Mark Pope's still trying to get established there. Um, and so I really like Bama's chances there. That being said, the rest of the bracket, not so sure about, but I think we can. I think we can win our first game, especially with it being such a late tip. My concern also, talking about if they play the next day, would be that game is so late and turning around and having to play, regardless of who you're playing, whether it be Florida or maybe Missouri. That's a tough opponent to play after a quick rest. So yeah, I'm sorry. Back to you, Charles.
No, I was just going to say, and I don't know what the likelihood is of Darian Reed being available for the SEC tournament since he's been out for so long. I know Coach Oates talked about that he was starting to do some more basketball practice activities with the team. But if he is a guy that is going to be available, my guess is he's still going to be on some type of minutes restriction. But the more games that you can get in the SEC tournament, obviously trying to help him get in some game action as you get ready for the NCAA tournament would obviously not only be beneficial for him, but for this team too. Just to have another guy that gives you 5 more fouls as a team and another guy that can get out there and I think defend for this team and give you another option on the defensive side.
So then what do you got for us in the potential second round matchups or semifinal matchups?
Yeah, I personally have Florida going to the semifinal. That's who we'd match up with, and Florida's obviously had our number. Todd Golden's done a really good job at Florida these past couple games. Um, our friend Riley Davis, North Carolina fan who joined us early in the year, talked about how he liked Florida prior to our game because of their ball movement, and we saw that on full display Wednesday. You can't really sit back on them because they can knock down threes, but if you put a lot of pressure, they're going to backdoor cut you to death and get easy layups. So an opportunity for our team on the defensive side, to find different ways to attack them potentially. Maybe we do sit back a little bit more. I don't think we're going zone. I don't think Nate Oates will ever go zone again because we ran 5 seconds of zone against Florida in the SEC tournament last year. And I don't even think they ran a play, but they hit a three against us. But it's more of that, intensity and effort, and especially, playing as Joey talked about so late the night before. Like, can you just show up and be mentally prepared and be focused? And, even if the game plan is to continue to pressure Florida, being aware that they're going to try to backdoor cut you and knowing, how they space the floor because they were obviously getting easy rim runs and lobs for us at the end of the game. Just not breaking down defensively, especially as much as we did. But we did find some success as far as offensively that I don't feel like we had last year, even though we scored a bunch of points against Florida in all three games. A lot of that was hitting shots late, like we did somewhat on Wednesday, but I did think we scored a lot more. And it'd be nice to have a game where hopefully Cliff is 100% playing Florida. Hopefully Aiden Sherrill is 100% throughout the entire game playing Florida. You win a game against Florida and you get to the championship game. You're definitely going to be back in that conversation for a number one seed in the NCAA tournament. And I think it's more depending what Houston does in the Big 12. I do think Auburn and Duke have probably locked up one seeds right now for the NCAA tournament. So it's coming down to Houston, Alabama, Florida, and Tennessee as far as who's going to get those other two spots, as far as being number one seeds in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, I think this is the game. Normally, I don't put a lot of stock into the SEC tournament as far as bracketology and brackets are concerned, because generally what happens with the committee is after Friday's games in the SEC don't matter. Like the championship game, I'll already tell you guys this right now. Championship game doesn't matter for seeding purposes. Alabama could get boat raced by 30 or win by 30, and it's not going to change anything with the as far as the bracket's concerned, just because Alabama or just because the SEC tournament's played so late that like they already have the bracket set by then. But the Saturday game, I think, is what is ultimately I think going to happen is for Alabama and Florida, if that is the game, um, they're going to have this scenario where Alabama gets Florida's region regardless if they beat Florida, and then Florida would stay in that or be the two. Like they're not going to have to rework the entire bracket. They're just going to split the positions of the teams. And I do think that that is a game for the last one seed, um, barring Florida, potentially losing earlier than that. I think if Florida loses before Saturday, I think Alabama gets the one seed as long as they win on Friday. Um, that's just my opinion. And then lastly, excuse me, lastly, the championship. Charles, I think you're going for a IBOB three-peat, I believe.
Yeah, would obviously be a wild game up in Nashville. Look, it's been talked about how tough the SEC has been this year. And I think I told y'all when I look at just the Wednesday slate of games, the only game I have any confidence that I think a team will advance is Mississippi State against LSU. And I'm still not like feeling great about that. And then, of course, as you start breaking it down even further, we'll take the very top. Let's say Arkansas does get past South Carolina. So then you got Arkansas and Ole Miss. And the winner of that game obviously takes on Auburn. Look, Ole Miss just got a huge win at home against Tennessee. and they got beat bad while they were at Auburn, but they've also played them very well in Oxford. Arkansas played Auburn very well in Auburn. The bottom half of that, Texas A&M and M and Tennessee, Texas A&M beat Auburn just a week ago, and Tennessee had them on the ropes at Auburn as well. So there's so many different combinations of what this championship game could be, both from the top line and the bottom line. It does feel destined in a year like this, and with the past 45 minutes of basketball that we've had within this, excuse me, not the past 45 minutes, the past 85 minutes of basketball within this state between Alabama and Auburn, that we need another 80 minutes, starting with another 40 in Nashville and then another 40 in the national championship game in San Antonio. But that would be you don't
I
want
don't
that.
want that. No, absolutely
Um,
not.
it would be Auburn fans do a good job of traveling. I imagine they would have us a little bit outnumbered in a game in Nashville, but that would be really cool for that crowd to be, I would still think pretty close 50-50, and every basket just getting a major reaction, every defensive stop getting a major reaction. Um, yeah, I think with how great the SEC has been this year, no disrespect to Florida, Tennessee, A&M, any of these other teams, but SEC fans deserve Alabama, Auburn for round three in Nashville to cap off the SEC season this year.
No thanks.
I'm good. I've gotten all the Iron Bowl I can handle.
Yeah. And if we've met in the national championship, I would no. I would
No,
die.
if
I
we
would
met in the
die.
national championship, I would literally drive to another state to watch the game. Like
Yeah.
just out of fear for my life, regardless of who
Yeah.
wins. I
Yeah. I
I
get the
drive up to
sentiment.
Nashville or drive to like Dallas or somewhere.
I get the sentiment, and for a non-Alabama Auburn fan, like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense because I think the Alabama Auburn game on Saturday was probably the best game of the season in college basketball. Um, and I think that that's going to continue, that would continue to be the case. I just personally, like, I'm good with not seeing Auburn again the rest of the season. Like, I'm good. I'd get out of there with a 1-1. While we're tied. I don't want to, I'm not a risky person. So like I'm pulling out all my money, all my bets, and we're just calling it a season with that and say we're done with that. So it's just my opinion. Um, Especially because the likelihood, so Alabama Auburn would have to meet in the SEC championship, and I'm pretty certain Alabama Auburn also would either have to meet in the Final Four or the national championship in the so like these are high stakes games, which I like my heart could barely take the game on Saturday. Imagine you have to beat Auburn to go to the national championship. I think my heart would explode personally.
I'm hoping with the win on Saturday, um, Auburn either being the number one overall seed or the number two overall seed in the NCAA tournament, that we're not going to fall to like a 6, 7, or 8, and we're not going to have to worry about being matched up in the same region as Auburn as a 1-2. I don't think the NCAA would do that, but
They won't.
the amount of times that they've stuck, and I know some of it's probably for travel expenses, but like I don't know what y'all may know it right now if Arkansas State was able to pull it out against Troy or not for the for the Sun Belt Championship. But if Troy, ended up winning that, or if North Alabama had beaten Lipscomb, I mean, the amount of times they'd stick an Alabama team to play against Auburn or Alabama in the first round, just um, hopefully they won't do that and stick us in the same region. I don't think they would, but you never know with the NCAA.
They won't. General bracket rules would be if we do face them a third time, we couldn't face them until I think the Elite Eight. So I think that would be, is that the same region
That,
still?
that, that's the same region.
No, maybe it's the Final Four because like Duke, UNC, they face each other three times, and they didn't play until the Final Four, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So, maybe that's it. But Joe, you said you did your bracket for SEC. What we got?
It's not great. I usually have a certain degree of confidence in brackets. This year with this SEC tournament bracket though, it's so tough. There's so many close games. I have Florida winning it all. I think Bama makes it that first game past Kentucky. Um, I think I have Auburn playing Ole Miss. I have them beating Ole Miss, but then I have them losing to Tennessee. But honestly, it could be Tennessee or A&M. I think that game, if Tennessee plays A&M, that game's going to determine a lot how the rest of the bracket plays out. I think I have Tennessee beating Auburn, but that could also once again be A&M. I think if Auburn plays A&M, that's another potential really good matchup. So overall, Florida winning the whole thing. Honestly, I want one of two things. I either want Alabama to win the whole daggum thing, or I want them to go home against Florida just for the extra day of rest. Um, the seeding at that point will have already been locked. I mean, if you lose to Florida, you're 2 seed. I mean, that's it. So, um, or maybe even a high 3, but I think they're pretty much a lock for a 2 now. So there's a lot of moving parts to this one though, just because, like I said, you do have that Texas A&M team, you have a Kentucky, you have a Missouri team that really could surprise some people. I mean, Missouri could possibly beat Florida, and then I'm just setting my bracket on fire at that point. But just there's a lot of stuff going on here. But like I said, I'd rather Bama win on Friday, beat Kentucky, and then just be out, or win the whole thing. Nothing else. Especially don't want to lose a championship game to Auburn.
Well, I will say in postseason tournaments, Nate Oates is undefeated on Saturdays, outside of the Final Four. Which
Hasn't he either lost first round or won the whole thing?
yeah,
Yeah.
in the SEC tournament,
So
yeah.
so
And
if we
then in
beat
the
Kentucky,
NCAA tournament, he's lost the first game of every of the weekend. He's never lost the or yeah, he's lost the first game of every weekend, including the Final Four, because that was the first game. It just happened to be on a Saturday that time. But he's never lost the second game of a postseason tournament like within a weekend. I mean, maybe he changes that this week. I agree with you, Joey. I think Florida wins. I just think there's just such a bad matchup for Alabama. They have a lot of athletic guards, but athletic bigs that present a lot of problems against us when, Cliff isn't super fast. Grant's been hampered by an injury. Maybe that he comes back and plays pretty well, like he did versus Auburn. I think Darian Reed, if he can play at all, he would be huge against Florida. But at the same time, I'm a little cautious about him playing just because I don't want to kill any momentum that the lineups have already had, and I think maybe that could potentially throw a wrench into that. But I think he's a good enough player to. I mean, we need him, in my opinion. Um, I think I have A&M or Tennessee beating Auburn in the other semifinal. Um, and then I think I've again Florida beating either A&M or Tennessee. So that's kind of just where I'm at.
yeah, so not too crazy different from mine then.
No,
Really about the
no.
same, honestly.
So now that we're into the SEC tournament, do y'all have an assessment as far as the regular season and your opinions on the regular season for Alabama?
I mean, I perfectly picked the schedule in both non-conference and regular seasons, so I would say I'm sorry, non-conference and conference play. So it went about what I expected. Maybe not in
Well,
the manner, but the record's the same.
I mean I'm happy with it. I know the end of the season was frustrating for a lot of people, especially before the Auburn win. But when you play seven ranked teams in a row, like you're bound to lose them, especially when half of them are on the road. And that like you lose one of those games at home, and then the other games that you lost were on the road. Right. Well, I guess technically Auburn was also at home, but um I think that any reasonable Alabama fan would take a 13-5 record in the SEC. You finish one game behind Auburn in the SEC championship race, which if you beat Tennessee, then I'm pretty sure you Alabama would have had the tiebreaker over Auburn if they beat Tennessee and then beat Auburn at home. I think because of, whatever. Maybe not because Florida would have been no, because Alabama and Florida or Auburn and Florida lost. So then
We needed to beat Tennessee, Florida, and Auburn, and then Auburn needed to drop two to us, Kentucky or A&M. So
I thought we've only finished one game out.
no, I think Auburn finished 15-3.
Well, either way, like I'm not upset with it. I think it's a good season. I did find a stat. It's the first time in Alabama basketball history that a in a 3-year period have teams have won 24 or more games in a season ever. That's the first time that's ever happened. I was waiting to tweet that out until potentially we win on Friday or win in our first round because I think 25 wins is a little bit better stat than 24 wins just because of like the you know
Round numbers.
yeah, yeah. Um, but yeah, it's the first time ever. So for all the talk of who's the best coach in Alabama basketball history, I think it's Nate Oates. He's still winning. Maybe he's not at Wimp's level right now, but it's just incredible what he's done, especially in this league this year, finishing 13-5 with I think like a top 6 most difficult strength of schedule in conference play, which the teams that finished above you were, I think, 14th and 12th. So pretty good job.
Yeah, if I have one gripe from this year, it's just I wish this team had performed a lot better at home in front of the home fans. Obviously, now we don't have to worry about that, which probably maybe plays better to this team playing on neutral sites and playing on the road. But I wish we had played more to. I feel like we could have played a lot more to a standard throughout the season. I felt there was a lot of performances that were a little bit lackluster, even though we still got the wins. But this has been a team that has continued to build since game one, and they have improved and they're continuing to improve. And as we talked about, probably midway through the season, when it was somewhat of a little bit slower start, not again from the wins and loss column, but just maybe how things were running and stuff like that, that this team is getting into the March playing some of its best basketball and playing it against really good competition. And now just need to continue to put these wins together and continue to play that standard, play with that intensity, play with that toughness. And I think it's going to be a fun March for all of us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
what people have to remember is that, obviously the losses were discouraging over the past couple of weeks, but we have to put it into context of how tough those opponents were. It's not like we were losing to Vanderbilt and South Carolina and teams like that during this final stretch. These were all incredibly talented teams that kind of gave us, honestly, a little bit of prep work heading into March. It really, when you play in the tournament, I mean, you guys know this. Every single game is like that. You're playing a ranked opponent every single game. You play 2 games in a weekend and then another 2 games the next weekend and so on and so forth. And so they're all gritty, they're all brutal, they're all physical. You need that effort, you need those blue collar points. And so these past few weeks really have been a great kind of, honestly, a gauntlet in a way of prepping this team and getting it ready and seeing what they're made of. So finishing that on a high note with Auburn was I think a great little, a great point. And so now it's just a matter of building off what we were able to accomplish over those final 7 games, and whether that's winning an SEC tournament or whether that's losing and prepping for the NCAA's. Regardless, I think this team is more than capable of accomplishing its task.
absolutely. I think that's it. I think the women's selection show is
Women's selection show will be Sunday night. Probably not going to be hosting in Tuscaloosa. Will probably be a 5 seed. Last projection was the 5 seed headed to Columbus, playing in Ohio State's region. But if you're able to get out of that region, how Charlie Cream has us slotted is to then play Sweet 16 and Elite 8 games in Birmingham. So even though you may have missed out on playing in Tuscaloosa, there's still the opportunity to get yourself playing in front of your home fans, probably in a time where you need it more than being shipped out west to have to play UCLA and USC. Really disappointing loss in the SEC tournament. Just couldn't really get the offense flowing. Give credit to Florida. They are a really good defensive team, but we are our starters play a ton of minutes. Sarah Ashley Barker, Leah Nye, Essence Cody, Carly Weathers. So maybe the 2 weeks off is good. I know Coach Curry doesn't really like to get out of a rhythm, but if there's a team that needs rest because their best players play a lot of minutes, it's probably our team. So still an awesome year, and I still think they got a lot of things ahead of them as they prepare for their March run here as well.
Absolutely. As far as our schedule is concerned, we might do a SEC preview space. Unsure. Just gotta look at the schedules. And then we might do a post game space after the Friday game, but I probably won't do one on Saturday and then also do one on Sunday. Like that's just a lot. So we'll probably just skip the space on Saturday and just do either a live space or a live show Sunday for the bracket. So other than that, check out the Weekly Joe podcast. The fellas and Megan are actually waiting in the in the recording right now to jump in. So we're going right into that. But check out Weekly Joe. Alabama baseball 16-1, ranked 17th in the country. Check out Field of 68. And be sure to like and subscribe to the video. We will talk again soon. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
But,